But when he flipped that dry erase board over, he had written the words, "Your death," on it. And I didn't care about even being deaf. What I cared about and what almost killed me and brought me to my knees was the fact that I had lost the privilege to serve my country.
Welcome to The Grit Factor, reimagining grit as part of the whole person in a life that matters. I'm your host, Shannon Huffman-Polson. This season is brought to you by Tiller, the first personal finance service to automate all your daily spending and account balances into spreadsheets, so you can track everything in one place with everything customizable, strict privacy, and no ads. Try Tiller free today at tillerhq.com. Also by the Grit Institute, providing whole leader learning journeys in grit and resilience, purpose and storytelling. Invest in your people for long-term success. Find out more at thegritinstitute.com. Gretchen Evans' 27-year Army career as a sergeant major ended with major injuries after a mortar attack in Afghanistan. But despite the deep difficulty in her change of mission, she hasn't slowed down. Join me as she shares her journey through severe injury and losing her purpose, to finding a new purpose in the most unexpected challenge, founding Team Unbroken, an adaptive adventure racing team. She also shares her personal rule for successes or failures, which I'm adopting as well, and which you won't want to miss. Well, Gretchen, thank you so much for coming on the Grit Factor today.
Well, thanks for having me. Okay, it's been an interesting beginning of a new year, and it's good to see you.
Wonderful to see you always. I am consistently inspired by your life and your work as it continues to evolve. Well, you had an incredible journey, and I thought we could start at the very beginning, which was a number of years ago now, with how it is that you came to join the military in the first place.
Yeah, so I joined the military really out of almost a survival necessity. Both my parents died within 6 months of each other when I was a teenager. And so my oldest brother, who just turned 21, he came home and took guardianship of myself and my younger brother, who was a minor. And then once we graduated high school, it was kind of like, okay, you're an adult now and you got to figure this out. I went to college for a year, but found it really difficult to work full time, go to school. I was doing anything to kind of keep that going, selling plasma, those kinds of things. Okay. And finally, I thought, really, there's got to be an easier way to do this.
Right.
And so I just went down to the recruiting station in Austin, Texas. And at this particular time, all the services were in one building. So, they were just lined up one door next to the next. So I went in, the first door I went into was the Marine Corps door. And honestly, I walked in and, at 19, I was 5'3" and like 90 pounds. And that guy, he really looked at me and he says, "I just don't think the Marine Corps is going to work for you." And I was too young and naive to even be offended. I thought, okay, he's probably giving me good advice, because he was real nice about it. He just said, "I don't think this is a place for you." And this is in 79. Okay. So you can imagine. Okay.
Wow.
So then next door to him was the Air Force. And I went in and I thought, okay, I'll fly airplanes. How cool could that be? Right. And right out of the bat, the recruiter said to me, "Well, that would be a great option for you, but you have to be 5'4" to fit in the cockpit, to reach the pedals and all the equipment. And so I thought, wow, my size is like really, burdened here at this time. So anyway, next was the Navy. I went into the Navy and I was almost to the point where I was signing the contract. And I looked up they had a poster on the wall with the sailor in their white uniform, and I just kind of looked and I said, "Are you guys still wearing that uniform?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Like those bell bottoms?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "No, I can't do that."
Oh, fashion comes into play. I love it, Gretchen.
I grew up in the 70s and I wore bell bottoms and I just wasn't going to do it anymore. Okay. So no hard feelings, but so I went to the next door, which was the Army, and I kind of went in there reluctantly, and said, you have any problem with my size? And he looked at me kind of funny and he goes, no. And he says, we don't care how big you are, we just care how big your bite is. Anyway, so
Oh,
that
that's a good
worked
one.
out. Yeah, that worked out for me, and signed a contract, and started my military career, and within the first 3 weeks of being at basic training, some people talk about that being one of their miserable experiences in life, but I just thrived in basic training.
Wow.
I loved the discipline. I liked the camaraderie. I liked the hard stuff, doing hard things,
Yeah.
it just really appealed to my personality. And I liked more than anything the sense of belonging. Okay.
Yes.
I was kind of a rudderless ship, almost an orphan, if, as you will. And so all of a sudden I had this instant family, and we all dressed the same and we all did everything together. And to me, that even if it was miserable, it was very appealing.
Yes. Oh, I love hearing that. That's lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, how did you find your specialty then after basic training?
Yeah. So, you take that test,
Sure.
as FAB, and depending on where you score, they give options to you. And I did well. And so, he said, intelligence is a great field to go into.
Yeah.
And it sounded good to me. So I went in as an intel analyst, initially.
Yeah.
And then pretty quickly, after like 3 years, I switched over to counterintelligence and went to language school, and then went to airborne school. And this opened up a lot of doors, and gave me great assignments overseas. It also threw me into really precarious situations really early in my career, because as an intel person, your job is mostly overseas, not in the States. That's not where you're looking for, who you're looking for. Okay. So I
Sure.
spent a lot of time overseas, as a counterintelligence agent, and it was a great job. It was a great fit for me. I loved every minute of it.
What was your language?
Started out in German, but this
Okay.
is a funny story. I had already done a tour in Germany. And
Right.
although I love Germany and love the country, I didn't want to be tied to, that part of Europe necessarily. So I had them switch me to Italian because,
Ah.
and honestly, because I kind of prefer dark-haired men. And so, I mean, I didn't tell my person who's doing my career stuff this information, but so I asked if I could switch, and they said, yeah, you can switch. So I switched to Italian, which was
Right.
at the time a really necessary language, and they were pushing it because if you remember in the early 80s, that's when the Red Brigade was the big terrorist organization, and
Right.
they were operating out of Italy.
Oh my
And
God.
so they were happy to have a female counterintelligence agent, go to Italian language school. And then they immediately sent me to Italy, which was fabulous. Okay. A great country. Yeah. So that worked out for me.
That's great. That's great.
I could tell you the truth and say it was all very hard thought out, but it really wasn't. Okay. It was more just a personal preference.
Well, that's fair enough. And also things tend to evolve as they evolve, right? It's needs of the army
Yes.
and your requests. Usually needs of the army come first, but it's nice when they all come together.
Yeah. Yeah. It
That's
was a
great.
good move. Good move for everybody.
Oh, that's fantastic. And you stayed in for for a full career, going to leadership levels that were fairly unprecedented, weren't they?
Yeah. So yes, it was at the time. I mean, even now, I think the percentage of people who actually enlist into the military and actually retire is like, somewhere below 5%.
Is
So
that right?
especially, in the early 80s, people came in for educational benefits and then they got out.
Right.
Okay. Or they came in for job, career, something that they could take on the outside and do. Okay. But
Sure.
I fell in love with the military. And so I thought to myself, you're just going to have to kick me out. I'm going to stay forever. Um, and so I did. And then, as opportunities presented themselves, I enjoyed each challenge that came along my way, and was fortunate enough to make rank rather quickly, and
Right.
ended up rising to the rank of command sergeant major and having the opportunity to lead troops in peacetime and war. And, I say it all the time, and it sounds like a cliche, but even on the worst of days,
Right.
they were some of my best days. Okay. Because
Sure.
that's when the magic happens, I think, is when, you're really challenged with what's going on and you're having to use every tool in your toolbox to
Right.
figure out and get through the day. And you're responsible for somebody other than yourself. And so you're not a self-licking ice cream cone, That's where that term in service came from. If you
Mm,
go back in history, back into like even World War II, even prior to that, but people would say, what do you do? Well, or where have you been? I've been in the service. And what that meant was that you were serving something other than yourself.
I love
So
that.
that term came from, I was in the service of my country. I was in the service of others. And that really resonated with me.
Yes.
And so I stayed for 27 years and would have stayed until I turned 60 and they kicked me out. But as you know, Shannon, I got wounded in
Yes.
Afghanistan by a rocket.
Yeah.
And
Tell us,
so,
tell us that story.
yeah, so, it was the last 90 days of that particular deployment. And can be the most dangerous time of deployment, the last 90 days, because troops start thinking about going home. Okay. It's
Right.
just natural. You've been gone for a long time. All of a sudden I start seeing short timer calendars pop up, on the sides of tents, and start seeing chalk marks and all kinds of things, which is a good thing. But also historically, we've seen that statistically that more soldiers or warriors, if you will, all branches of the service, the casualty rate is higher in the last 90 days of a deployment than it is any other time.
Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
So, this not being my first rodeo, I thought, well, I'll go make a morale, run and just check on the troops and just remind them that we're still in a very dangerous place. We still have 90 days to go. And I was going to start rotating them back because I was moving back a whole division. So, that doesn't happen in a day. It takes, weeks. And so as the new unit's moving in, I'm moving troops out.
Right.
And on this particular day, I landed in my helicopter at a very remote forward operating base that was really close to the Pakistan border. And this place had been under fire so many times. And these poor guys, they had held down the fort, and they were in a key position for us, a key piece of terrain. And so I went there that day and I just jumped out of the helicopter and was shaking hands and, and giving high fives. And my speech was, guys, 90 days, we're going to go home. And we all want to get there, but you need to keep your head on a swivel because we're in a very dangerous place. And so just, don't get distracted. And then I barely got those words out when all of a sudden we started taking in mortar fire. And it was coming in like rain. I mean, like rain. I'd never seen it like this before. And so the protocol is you send out your quick reaction force that go and find who's shooting at you. And then everybody else is to take cover from the incoming rounds.
Right.
And then those in the bunkers, right? So they had those igloo shaped concrete bunkers that are reinforced with sandbags. So I was yelling to the troops, okay, everybody get in the bunkers, get in the bunkers. But before I could get myself in a bunker, a round landed to my right. And it detonated and exploded. And two of my personal security detachment guys were standing to my right, and they absorbed the brunt of that blast. Okay. And what I really think saved my life that day were those two soldiers, because like I said, they really took the brunt of it. They kind of shielded me from the majority of the blast, but also it was my size. Because even with a flak jacket on and with my weapon and with, ammunition, maybe I weighed 130 pounds, maybe. Okay. So the eyewitnesses said when that thing exploded and it threw up all that earth and everything, and on that explosion, it picked me up and threw me horizontally. And then I hit head first into one of those concrete bunkers. And I had a Kevlar on and everything, but still that impact was pretty bad. And so the next thing I remember was waking up in a helicopter because they were medevacing me to Bagram. And the first thought I thought was, this is not the way I usually ride in a helicopter lying down.
Right. Right.
I'm usually, up front talking to the pilots or, got the radio on or something. I said, this is unusual for me to be laying down. And then there's this like face in front of me, and
Wow.
I just kind of remember, and I think I do what everybody who's ever been injured before and doesn't have a total recall about what happens. I looked down to see what was there. Okay. And I did see arms and legs, and that was a good thing. I did see some, blood and stuff. And then I don't remember anything else until the next time I woke up in lawn stool.
Right.
And
this is back
what
in
had
Germany,
transpired.
right?
Yeah. So what had transpired, they got me to Bagram and then put me on the hospital bird, flew me to lawn stool. And then they put me in a or a hospital induced or whatever coma for a couple of days, simply for the fact so that they could do an evaluation about my injuries.
Sure.
The ones that were physical and outward were easy, but they wanted to look on the inside and see if there had been some damage to my internal organs or things like that. And and there was some. You can't absorb a blast like that and expect your insides not to be like, but anyway, so what they told me was all my internal organs had like moved like a half an inch. Okay. So I looked at the x-ray and said, oh, that's not right. But the body's, remarkable. And so that kind of, after a few years, that kind of righted itself. But they also had to pull out like a bajillion pieces of shrapnel and all the little places that weren't protected by my combat boots, weren't protected by my flak vest. So, up in my thighs and my arms and, my neck, I had some shrapnel. But also I had a very severe closed head wound that needed to, initially repair itself, at least enough so I wouldn't be in intense pain when I woke up. And they also found out while I was unconscious that I was deaf. And so that day that they woke me up, there was a young Army doctor, who was in his uniform, but he also had a white coat on and stethoscope, and he had a dry erase board, a small one, like 8.5 by 11, and he had a black Sharpie, and he was writing something on it, and he kind of waved at me like this, kind of got my attention. Now, the funny thing is, I remember that I kind of had what I thought were like dead ears. You know how when you had been close to maybe you've been really close to a machine gun or something. Okay. Sure. And all of a sudden you can't hear for a little while because it's affected your hearing. Sure. And I thought, okay. And I thought to myself, I just can't hear well because I've been hurt. Okay. But when he flipped that dry erase board over, he had written the words, "You're deaf," on it. And it took me kind of a couple of seconds to kind of process that, why he was writing that in the ramification of those two words, "You're deaf."
Right.
And then it really hit me. And so I took the board and I erased it with my hand, the words, and I wrote the word "forever" and showed it to him, and he nodded his head.
Oh, Gretchen.
So I didn't know a lot. Okay. But one thing I knew at that very moment was that my military career was over.
Wow.
I knew that I could not continue serving in the military as a deaf person. Right. And so everything else kind of went away. Okay. And I just had to think about that for a minute. And I didn't care all of a sudden about all the little holes in my body from the shrapnel. And I didn't care about my head wound. And I didn't care about even being deaf. What I cared about and what almost killed me and brought me to my knees was the fact that I had lost the privilege to serve my country. Oh. That was the injury that I almost didn't survive. And so, that's really was the one thing that, like I said, it brought me to my knees. I didn't have a plan B. You never think you're going to get hurt. Okay. And especially I think as senior leaders, because it's the young guys and gals that are out there kind of, really on the front lines, and you're more the orchestrator or whatever. Right. And so you kind of think you're immune, if you will, from that. Now, that's not true because, there's no front lines in the wars we fight anymore. But right. It just never occurred to me that I would be injured like that. And so I had no plan B. I had no even thought about retirement. I was 46 years old. Even though I had 27 years in, I was planning on staying until I was 60, the mandatory retirement age for non-commissioned officers. Yeah. And so there was I had no safety net. I didn't have an address to go home to. My car had been in storage for about 3 years. I had a post office box for my mail. I had a barracks room at Fort Bragg where the few possessions that I had, were there, and because I was rotating in between the two theaters as a sergeant major and only went home, on occasion. And so it just hit me like, I don't even really know where to go. I don't even know what to do.
Gretchen,
and so,
can you stop for just a moment? You were rotating between the two theaters, like Iraq to Afghanistan?
Yeah. So,
Wow.
so for sergeant majors, once you serve past the 2-star level, your assignments become nominative. So when a general officer, when they receive their assignment that they're going to take a unit, become a commander of a unit at that level, they get to pick their sergeant major.
Okay.
Because it's important that relationship work. Okay. Right. And so what was happening for me was that, because we were in both Iraq and Afghanistan at that time, this is 2006. So we were fighting both theaters, that I would go to Iraq with a unit and then come home. And then my next assignment would be, going overseas. There was nothing for people stateside at the time. Okay. Sure. My MOSs and my experiences were not led to me to take over like a unit that wouldn't deploy. And plus everybody was deploying. So it didn't really matter. I took signal units, I took MP units, I took, because you become generic at that level.
Sure.
So what they're looking for are your leadership traits.
Sure.
Not so much your MOS. In fact, the MOS nomenclature for Command Sergeant Major is 00 Zulu. So it's not tied to any particular field. Or, so like I said, you become generic. You're a 00 Zulu.
Okay.
And so, like I said, I took signal units, MPs. I went with a area support group. And my last tour that's who I went with. And so you just go wherever you're called and wherever you're picked to go. And so that's really what happened. I would come home for 6 months and then I get another assignment and, so yeah, it was crazy.
And with that kind of operational tempo also, I would feel, it would seem that your sense of purpose that was already so strong is just further integrated into who you are. And I can't imagine how strong that must have been and how devastating to have that then cut off.
Yeah, it was literally like hitting a brick wall. It was like I was going 100 miles an hour, feeling out my passion and purpose in life.
Yes.
We had 2 wars going on at the same time. I was a soldier, my job was very clear to me. Okay. Yes. My job was to take care of troops, to get them to the right place at the right time with the right equipment, and to make sure that we were successful in our mission on a daily basis. Very clear, very simple, very clear, and very important. And all of a sudden that was gone.
Wow.
And then, what happens is when you get hurt like that, and, this is not a hit on the military, it's just the way things are, is that, you can't stay. So they hand you off, they, retire you, and then you get handed off to the VA for your rehabilitation. And so you're in this quagmire of change. Wow. while you're dealing with your injuries. So this is before the warrior transition battalions had begun. So that wasn't the way that I was processed. Those became later, and it was because the transition needed to be a little more smoother.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. So, that leads up to that.
And so how did you navigate that? I mean, you have your barracks room and your car in storage, and you're navigating a whole new field of needing to be in the world in a different way that must have been so difficult on so many levels.
It was awful at first. Horrifically awful, in the sense that I was brokenhearted.
Yeah.
And being a hearing person for 40 years and then becoming a deaf person, it was a hurdle that was, it was tough. Okay. Now, part of my rehabilitation, they sent me to lip reading school, which was helpful. And it was also helpful that I was a linguist, because it really is like learning a different language. So like you said earlier in the, in the conversation, everything has its purpose. Okay.
Yes.
And who would have known that I would have needed, those language skills on how to learn a new language and what that takes to learn another language would then come into play as part of my recalibration after my injuries. And so I think it was a blessing from the very, beginning, that at least I knew how it was to have to learn a different language. And then, what happens is you physically get okay. And then you have to deal with really the hard part. And that's your emotional and your mental status. So getting healed from the, traumatic brain injury, it is what it is. Even being deaf, it is what it is.
Sure.
Even the skeleton issues that I have, it is what it is. It's very linear.
Sure.
But this mental and emotional part was something I had never experienced and that nobody could quite fix. It was like it was unfixable. It was just something that was just kind of there. And this is like still pretty early on, 2006. We've been at war in Afghanistan for 6 years and in Iraq for 3. In perspective of a 20-year war, this was early on.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So
we were not dealing with PTSD and moral injury and all this other stuff in the way that we are now. Right. And so people were doing their very, very best to try to deal with this. But most of it for me was that I was determined not to let the enemy take any more from me. Okay. Wow. They took my career. They took my ears. They took, which was a lot. Okay. Yes. And I just said, they're not going to take my entire life. I'm not going to just surrender to that. Okay. Now, I say that with all this confidence because I'm, past the awful, terrible days. But I will tell you, there were days when, I didn't want to be here anymore. Like so many of our veterans, where it was just too much, where you think, man, why couldn't I have just died on the battlefield? How much easier would that have been? Not only just me, but my family and everybody else, go out like a hero. Okay. Why couldn't that just had been the end?
And what do you do? What do you do when you're in that space?
What you do is that every day, you wake up and you find a reason to live.
Yeah.
Every day. Yeah. And it's not a one-time thing. And it's not even a once a day thing. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 times a day. You got to remind yourself that there's a reason for you to be here. And you really have to deal with those demons on a daily basis.
Right.
And so what helped me, a couple of things helped me. One was that I got a service dog. Okay. And she was a hearing dog. And so that she allowed me to get some of my independence back. Like when, I couldn't hear the doorbell. I couldn't hear a door knock. I couldn't hear the dryer go off. And so, all these things, everyday things were a pain in the ass to me and also made me feel very disabled and very handicapped. Right. So when I got the hearing dog, she alerted me to all these sounds. And also she made it legal for me to drive because she could hear emergency vehicles.
Oh my goodness.
And so my independence. Yes. So all of a sudden I wasn't reliant on somebody else to get me from point A to B, which you can just imagine how that felt to a 47-year-old woman at that time, who was a sergeant major in the Army. And all of a sudden I couldn't legally drive a car because I was deaf. Okay. And how that limited my interaction, how that limited even my way of just independence. It just made the suck so much more. Okay. Than it needed to be. Okay. So she changed my life and I could go hiking with her and feel safe. And so that was the first big step, was getting this hearing service dog. Okay. Who absolutely 100% probably certainly changed my life and probably saved my life.
What was her name?
Aura, Aura.
Beautiful.
She's a beautiful golden retriever, Labrador mix, and smart as a whip. And I put that dog through hell. She hiked with me up out in Colorado, 14,000-foot mountains, just she and I. When I needed to get away, I took her whitewater rafting. I took her zip lining. That poor dog.
That's fantastic. I love it.
She has a story to tell. I'll tell you. Okay.
Wow.
And, I didn't go any place without her. I mean, she went everywhere with me. So that was the first, I would say, first time I was able to take a deep breath and say, okay, I can now do more. And
Yes.
that opened the door then to what I already call my inner core of wanting to be involved in other people's lives and to help them in whatever it was they needed help with so that they could succeed in what they wanted to do, which is what I did as a sergeant major. Okay.
Yes.
Was
Yes.
to help soldiers that was my job, be the
Yes.
best that they could be. Okay. Whether it was on the range or whatever it was, a driver or wherever it was that they were, or cook, whatever it was.
Right.
My role was to set them up for success and help them navigate and use my wisdom and knowledge to help them succeed. And so I just threw myself into this in the veteran world and found my place, because there was lots of people just like me, tons of people, as you know, just like me, who were going through the same thing that I was.
Yes.
What I had on my side that some didn't was the fact that I got wounded at 46, not 20.
Yes.
That I had a strong support system, and some did not.
Right.
That I, had the grace to have been through some trials and tests and come out the other side, where these young people barely even knew who they were before they were injured. Right. They were 18, 19, and 20 years old. They're just trying to figure out who they are. And all of a sudden their life has been, they've been kicked to the curb.
Right.
And so I just turned into like a little crazy sergeant major veteran that went around helping people. I mean,
how lucky are we in this world to have you, Gretchen, in both in service in uniform and in service out of uniform? I mean, that's a real renewal of purpose, isn't it?
Yeah. And what I did, I just changed uniforms. Okay. Really, honestly, I still operated in that kind of sergeant major time frame. Like I'd see something, that only sergeant majors see. Like, I can see a uniform infraction from 100 yards. So I would see a veteran struggling in some area. Right. And I would go up there and say, I have some wisdom in this area. I've, been through this process. Okay. Whether it would be with the VA or just navigating, having your life changed, or whether I'd be happy to help you with this. And if they said yes, I'd be like on cloud nine and said, I was like gathering all these people. My husband says, man, you got like all these people. But it not only made me happy, but it helped me heal, because the focus was no longer on me.
Yes. Yes.
It was back on where it needed to be, on others. And that was the game changer. That was the silver bullet. Right. Was that I didn't even care about my injuries anymore. I didn't even consider myself deaf anymore, because I had a dog that could hear. And that was good enough for me. Right. In fact, if you asked me today, I would give you my ears for that dog. Okay.
Wow.
Take them. I don't care. Okay. There's a lot to be said about hearing, but there's days when I'm thankful I'm deaf. Okay.
Well, lately in politics, it's a good thing, I think.
There's a lot of noise out there, right?
There is.
Yeah. And I don't have to hear it. Okay. So there's a good side to everything.
Sure.
If you look for it.
Sure.
So now what I'm doing is, I wrote a book called Leading from the Front.
Yes.
Just talking about my soldiers and how awesome they are. I do a lot of public speaking at all kinds of things, whether it be a nonprofit organization, veteran-centric, or a corporation.
Sure.
Okay, that wants to come in and say, tell us what it really means to be a team. Tell me what it really means to be overcoming obstacles. Tell me what it really means to embrace the suck. Because those are all really strong words and they're very cliche, but there's something there's a method on how to embrace the suck.
Well, there's a reason that it becomes cliche, because it's so relevant and so necessary in times of challenge and change, right? I mean, that's the grit factor.
Like your grit factor.
That's right.
Your grit factor. Once you figure out the grit factor, then it's a real thing. Okay. So embracing the suck is a real thing.
Yes.
Navigating life as a disabled person is a real thing.
Absolutely.
Okay. And there are ways that work better than others. So I took it as my new ethos, like just like the ethos I had in the military. I established new ethos, and my new ethos was I'm going to help as many people as I can for as long as I can, in whatever way I need to, for them to be able to reach their and to understand their new passion and purpose in life.
Yes.
Because without that rudder, okay, that's when things get cattywampus.
Right. Absolutely. And so now you transitioned your purpose now a couple of times. I mean, that's really powerful. That ability to do that by itself is an amazing thing.
Yeah. And so out of that came a couple of things. Like I said, came the book. I put together an adaptive adventure racing team. We competed on the world's toughest race, Team Unbroken. We are still racing, but for every race we do, we probably do 3 speaking engagements about Team Unbroken. And, you know, the name came from the fact that even for me in the beginning of my rehabilitation, I have some physical scars. I've got some scars on my face and other things. And people would look at you and, you know, and I think would, you know, measure you up in a sense. And it's, I would say this for amputees too, like, you know, they look at something and you're missing a limb. They see something that's broken, and maybe not in a malicious way, but still it's, you can't ignore that. Okay. And so people would predetermine what you were capable of before you ever had a chance. And as soon as they learned that I was deaf, I mean, all kinds of doors would shut on me. Okay. Because how can a deaf person possibly do this? And so that's why I named the team Unbroken, because I may look broken. Okay. And I do have some things that are broken and have been broken, but I'm not broken. Okay. I'm really not. And nobody out there really is broken. What we are the same person I was before that rocket. Okay. When my life changed in a middle cycle, I'm still that same person on the inside. Actually, I'm a better person on the inside. Okay. I have better empathy and better sympathy, and I'm wiser and I'm kinder and I'm more motivated than I've ever been.
Yes.
But I had to remind myself that, you know, that blast took away your ears. Yeah. And it messed your head up and, you know, all kinds of things. But what it didn't do, okay, was mess with my moral thermometer and my desire to be a person who wants to help and help change the world for the better. And maybe that's one person at a time. That rocket couldn't touch that. Okay.
Wonderful. That
was still there. Okay. But all the things that happened that day, that was still intact, but I had lost it for a while because it was hidden underneath pain and stress and all those other things. So anyway, Team Unbroken, we do crazy things, absolutely crazy things. But we also love to talk and tell our story. So everybody in my team either has a life-altering injury, illness, or has experienced a trauma. And so
how did you come to this? How did you start? I mean, it's one thing to be a command sergeant major as a woman in the Army. It's another thing to go through a traumatic brain injury and losing your hearing and having to come back from that and being able to come back from that in this incredibly beautiful and meaningful way that serves others. And then you go on to an adventure racing team that is looking at the world's hardest race. How does that happen?
I don't know. I just, that's a bad answer, right? But I don't know. You know, kind of fell in my lap. Eric Weinmayer, who's a really good friend of mine, who's the first blind man who ever summited Mount Everest.
Yes.
He's really the one who planted the seed. Eric and I have done some adventures together. He and I took 12 mixed ability kids to Nepal and did the Himalayas with these kids. And they were blind and they were deaf. And a couple of them had cerebral palsy. And what parent let a blind guy and a deaf girl take their kids on a trip like that? I don't know, but they all sound, you know, let them go. But he became a really good friend of mine, and his story is amazing in itself. But he sent me an email and said, Gretchen, you ought to put a team together and go do the world's toughest race. And I just kind of took that as a challenge. And also, they had never had an adaptive team do the world's toughest race.
Sure.
And so when I first submitted our application, they said no like 10 times. Okay. And finally, I sat down on Zoom, just like we're doing right now, with Bear Grylls and Mark Burnett and the race director. And they said to me, Gretchen, we want to say yes to Team Unbroken, but we're afraid. And I said, what are you afraid of? And he says, well, we're afraid you're going to get hurt. And I about laughed out loud. I said, we've already been hurt. We've been blown up. I said, all I'm asking is that you don't prejudge us, that you don't make assumptions based on our injuries.
Yes.
That you don't close a door on me just because I'm deaf and I have a brain injury.
Right.
I'm asking just to be put on the same playing field with everybody else. And if we wash out on day one, then that's on us. Okay.
Sure.
But if you don't ever give us the chance, then neither you will know or I will know what was possible.
Absolutely.
Who wants to be that person? And they said, gosh, when you say it like that, you make us sound like assholes. And I said, don't be assholes.
Oh,
yeah. It's a true story. You can ask them.
That's great. I love it. That's perfect.
So they said yes. And we went and did the world's toughest race. And we're still featured on Amazon Prime. And we were by far not the most competitive team on that race. But let me tell you what we did do. We opened a door that was closed.
Yes. Yes.
We represented a population of people who had never been represented at this race before.
That's right.
And according to Mark Burnett, he got more mail about Team Unbroken than he did any of the top 10 teams.
Oh my gosh.
He said, you inspired so many people who had these mixed abilities to watch Team Unbroken race in that race. And he says, you got to keep racing.
Tell us about that race. What was it like? Like, what was it like
to
just show up there? And I mean, I've seen the Netflix and it's amazing. So tell us.
So it's the toughest race of the world. It was, I think, 460 kilometers, 10 days. And adventure racing is not like a triathlon or Ironman or like a marathon. You don't necessarily know what disciplines you're going to do. You have some inkling of some of the disciplines, but you never know how far you're going to go on any given day or what they're going to ask you to do. And that's what makes adventure racing so incredible, is that it's really strategy and working, problem solving, and a little bit of being an athletic. But right. I've seen teams that were less athletic beat teams that were in the greatest of shape because they were smarter. Yeah. So look, the world's toughest race, we knew we'd be mountain biking. We knew we'd be paddleboarding in the ocean. We knew we'd be swimming. We knew we'd be, whitewater rafting. We knew we'd be trekking through the jungle. We knew we'd be climbing cliffs. What we didn't know is that we were going to build these crazy little Fijian boats out of bamboo. And we didn't know that we were going to have to do all kinds of crazy things. Okay. And so that's the beauty of adventure racing. Right. And also you have to stay together. So the team no member of the team can be more than like 30 feet from the other person, because, you can't like send out a recon party. Sure. Okay. And so that really spoke to our military theme, because that's kind of the way, a small unit operates. Okay. Right. And also all of you have to finish. Yes. So if somebody gets hurt or somebody decides they don't want to go any further or whatever, the whole team is out, which also resonated with us, because it's like leaving someone on the battlefield. We would never do that. Okay. Yeah. So we were so okay with all these rules. Okay. We're like, okay, we can do that. So anyway, we went, we were considered the nicest team there, because people would lose a piece of equipment that they really needed and like could be disqualified from the race. Sure. And being a sergeant major and understanding supply demands, I had extra of everything. So I would lend a piece of equipment to another team, and they would say, well, what if you need it? I said, we'll cross that bridge when we have to. Okay. But you need it right now, or you can't continue to race. Sure. So to me, this is a no-brainer. I said, I'm going to give this piece of equipment to you, and when you're done and you don't need it anymore, you can give it back to me. Okay. Wow. So, but in a competitive adventure race, you would never see a team do that, because it's all about winning. But see, Team Unbroken, we were not about winning. Right. We were about showing up and honoring those who look like us, and going to a place where people like us had never been. And so the victory for us was just getting accepted and doing the best that we could. That was the victory for us. And, and so that was what it was all about us, was just, we were just going to get there and do the best that we could. But we got that door open, and now it's open for anybody of mixed abilities to go do the next world's toughest race.
Well, I love how you're saying both mixed abilities and the word adaptive, which I just think is wonderful. I'm so grateful for the word and how it is that you clearly are adaptive and adaptable in ways that most of us have never had to consider.
Yeah, the mixed ability word I really like, because what I said to people was, yeah, I'm deaf, but I now lip read. So I lost one ability, but I added one.
Yes.
So I'm mixed. Okay. So it's not all about the abilities that you lose. It's about the ones that you add, which makes you a mixture of abilities.
Yes.
And so I don't feel like I'm disabled. I never introduced myself that way. And it doesn't resonate with who I am. Okay. Sure. If you were looking at my medical records, you would say, Gretchen, you're wicked disabled, but but I don't think that way.
Wow. I mean, that's just a phenomenal story. And so you went from that world's toughest race, and then you have continued to race. Your team has continued to race.
Yeah. We had a race scheduled for Holland, but it just got canceled. But we have a race in Savannah in April, and we have a race in June in Pennsylvania, which is a 5-day race, pretty arduous.
Yeah.
And so we race as often as we can. And like I said, and we speak on behalf of Team Unbroken all the time, individually and as a team, to do the best that we can, just to enlighten the world about, things. Okay. So teamwork, how important that is, having a rope team, how important that is, how believing in yourself and not being the first person to say no.
Yes.
We are so hard on ourselves that before anybody else says no, we always tell ourselves no sometimes first.
Right.
And we really have to stop that. Okay. Say yes to yourself and make the circumstances say no to you, because you're going to get some no's and you're going to get some failures.
Sure.
But you got to try.
What do you do? I mean, you've already answered this, but I come up with this against this question and get asked this question quite a bit, but how would you answer the question about what do you do when you feel ashamed? What do you do in the face of fear? What do you do in the face of failure?
So when I feel shame, and I have shame, I have what I call sometimes leadership guilt, because of my positions of leadership in the military. I had to make decisions, big decisions, and sometimes those decisions cost people their lives. Now, it took me a long time to be able to say, at the time, I made the best decisions that I could make.
Right.
But, there for a while, there was some guilt associated with that.
Right.
So shame, I have to remind myself of that very thing, that, Gretchen, you chose route A over route B because on that day, the intelligence that you got said that was the better route. And that's the decision you made, just like any military person would have. And you went there. And unfortunately, in war, it's chaos. Sure. And people get hurt and people die.
Yeah.
But that doesn't solely belong on your shoulders alone. And so I had to forgive myself. So to get rid of shame is to put it in perspective. Did you do your best? Mm-hmm. Okay. Did you have good intentions? Okay. Then there's no shame in that. Okay. If really, there's not. Yeah. What was your second one? What do I do? Fear. Okay.
Fear and failure. Yeah.
Okay. So fear is funny for me because my husband says to me with a straight face, he says, darling, your sense of fear is very diluted compared to the average person.
That's great.
Which most people would say, holy shit, I'm not doing that. I think I could do that.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. So it is a little diluted. Okay. And maybe that's from the military or just from adventure racing or whatever.
Sure.
But I do get frightful. But you have two choices. Okay. If the fear is right in front of you, what are you going to do? You're either going to face it and keep going, right? It's like being in hell. Okay. Keep going. Don't stay there. Okay. Right. So with the fear, face it, address it, try to make, okay. Or if you decide at that point that it's the risk factor is too high, then you got to be brave enough to say, I'm not doing that.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not doing that. Okay. Right. So to me, it's, be reasonable, but don't be afraid to fail. Don't let that be your fear, and don't be afraid even to try.
Yeah.
Don't let that own you. Okay. So have a reasonable sense of what's reasonable or not. Okay?
Sure.
And then what was your other one?
Well, the last one is when we do fail. I mean, maybe we fail in something where we look back and say, you know what, that was the wrong thing for me to do, or I didn't treat that person as well as I should have, or you try something and it doesn't work out, and maybe it's a big failure. It was a big attempt and it's a big failure. What do you do in the face of that?
I have a theory. It's a personal theory. So I grieve failures just the way I celebrate victories for 24 hours, and then I let it go. So let's say I have a big victory. I go out and I run a marathon. I have a personal best. Okay. And that feels really good. So I give myself 24 hours to pat myself on the back and have a good time, and all that kind of stuff. And then I have to remember that, victories are short-lived as well. Yes. Same thing with a failure. Okay. I failed. I didn't prepare. It was a bad call. I own it. I made that decision. It was a bad decision. Okay. I'll take ownership for it. If apologies need to be made, make them. If rights need to be made, make it right. But the same thing. Okay. I can't let that failure, percolate forever. I give it 24 hours to feel like crap. Okay. And then I have to move on.
Gretchen, that's brilliant. That is brilliant.
I know, it's brilliant. It just works.
Thing I've ever heard. That's great. That is great. I love it. I love it. Well, so is Team Unbroken? I know that there's not another, the world's toughest race is sort of on hold for COVID. Is that right? Okay. But is that
it's on hold? Yeah, it's supposed to be in Patagonia, which think of how fascinating that would be. Yeah. And Team Unbroken would certainly we'll be throwing in our application. Okay, and I hope I don't have to fight with Bear and Mark Burnett again. Okay, but
you let me know, Gretchen. I'll That's good.
But in the meantime, like I said, we're racing as often as we can, and we're trying to live our life not just in the fullest way for us, but as a good example for others, trying to be people worth emulating if we can, faults and all. Okay. And, sometimes we're the slowest racers out there because these are all elite athletes and we're adaptive athletes, right? But we still cross the finish line, or sometimes we don't, but we're still there. Okay. So I always think courage is not finishing the race. Courage is showing up at the start line. It takes a lot of courage to say, I'm going to go do this, not knowing what that means. And even in just a regular race, you don't know, how you're going to feel that day. You don't know what the weather's going to do. You don't know lots of things. Right. So the courage to show up at the start line to me is the key piece. Be courageous enough to start.
Yes. That's a wonderful, wonderful thing for people to take with them from your many, many pieces of wisdom here and to internalize. I would love to come to Patagonia and watch you guys race. So
come on.
You can come. That's great. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing these incredible lessons. I know there's so much more. And I know you're going to have a huge contingent of people now following Team Unbroken that are excited to have been cued into the work that you're doing.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Shannon, and have a great day. And it's good to see your bright smiling face, and thank you for everything that you're doing out there. Okay. Well, I got my grit intact. Okay.
Well, actually, let's end on that. How do you define grit? How do you think about the grit factor?
I think grit is that little voice inside of you that says, oh, hell no, I'm not quitting. Right. No, you kind of crack your head a little bit and say, all right, I'm up for this. Yeah. Okay. Doesn't mean, like I said, I'm going to be right. It doesn't mean I'm going to be successful, but it's that little voice that says that. And this comes from Eric Weimeyer. He has this mantra, and I've adopted it. Yeah. He says, what is within you is stronger than anything in your way. Think about that. What is within you is stronger than anything in your way. So that just means that you have already in you what you need to face what you need to face. It doesn't talk anything about victories. It doesn't talk anything about failures. It just says you have within you to face anything that's in your way.
Mm.
That's my grit.
That's fantastic. Thanks for listening to The Grit Factor. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast app and share it with a friend. Also, pick up your own copy of The Grit Factor for more candid stories and lessons from leaders in the vanguards of their fields. And invest in yourself and in your team with learning journeys in grit, leadership, purpose, and storytelling at thegritinstitute.com. Thanks for listening. I hope you'll join me for the next episode of The Grit Factor.